But here's what I'm going to do today. Let's spend half an hour. Here's a Cliff Notes. Half the time, I'll give you I try to make a case for what I believe is a hirable AI or a software-defined workforce, a pretty new concept that kind of, springing up right now. There's quite a few companies. Humatron is one of them. By the way, I'm invested in Humatron, so I actually put my money where my mouth is. And half the time, I'm basically going to show you what Humatron is today. By the way, everything is public, and you guys can try it yourself. But again, it's a very much work in progress, so don't be alarmed by that. So we're going to do that. Skip that. So what is AI worker or a software-defined workforce in general? Think about this. It's something, essentially it's an agent that you can hire. And when I'm thinking about the different types of application of AI that we've had literally for close to 20 years at this point, I always keep thinking about it as in a sort of a way where you're packaging the same functionality in many different ways. Think about this. We have chatbots since 2015. I was a part of this first wave of 2015. Then we got a Copilots recently. And the difference between chatbots and Copilots, right? The Copilots need the host application. But fundamentally, the back end of chatbots or Copilots, it can be pretty much the same. So you package this a little bit differently. Then agents came around, right? With all of us right now talking about agents. So the agents is fundamentally just a different repackaging of the same back end capabilities. Probably the best definition of agents is think about the microservice where you replace compute plane with LLM. It's still basically an API-driven piece that you have to somehow use. Then there's an AI worker, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail, but this is fundamentally where you can hire AI agent in very much the same way as you can hire into people today. And there's definitely physical AI. Well, it's embodiment of just robotics as we know them, and that's coming up in a few years from now. Some of them actually available. If you guys on the wait list for Prime, it's actually being delivered as probably like this spring. So the concept of AI worker basically is an idea that, you remember this question that was asked like a little last time, what is the impediment for enterprise to use AI agent? So what is the AI agent? It's a software. You have to install, you have to buy, you have to program, you have to configure all those complications just to get some functionality out of this. Think about how we as companies get something done. If we have a piece of job that needs to be done, we tend to hire people or tend to actually hire somebody who can perform the job. So why don't we actually apply the same paradigm to AI? What if we can hire AI in practically the same way we can hire individuals? And that means that hiring and onboarding and daily work should be really much identical. I usually call this, if you don't squint, you shouldn't see really a difference between hiring people or hiring AI into your organization. I know it sounds a little bit far-fetched. Most of you probably thinking about right now, holy crap, it's bits, out there. And you're right. It's still, for example, there are some edge cases. For example, we don't really have yet, production Gaussian avatars, so we cannot really do a Zoom call with AI with the full facial expressions. That's likely coming up in about 12 months from now. We're going to have API for Zoom. We're going to have a Gaussian avatar. So we're saying going to be jump on the call with AI. But even today, you can basically talk. I'll show you today how you're going to do this. One of the interesting part of the AI work is that obviously they have to be autonomous. We can think about AI agents to work autonomously. It doesn't come for free. Autonomous behavior is pretty tricky to implement. Just about now, if you follow the news, OpenAI announced tasks, right? It's some kind of rudimentary way of having the background task running. But it's just about now surfacing up, so it's not really trivial. So the autonomous way to do that is very important. Probably one of the most important traits of software-defined workforce is a social and organizational integration. What separates us as employees and teammates is that we have that social and org integration into the company. We're all part of it, right? We know our friends, we know our friends' phone numbers, we know their names, we know who they're reporting to, how do they work. We know that if I need to basically buy a new mice, I have to get a report or permission from somebody. We have all this organizational connecting tissue that AI agents by default wouldn't have. For example, we know socially that I don't want to call my boss in the middle of the night unless I have something really, really important to tell, right? If I have something to update, I'll wait till the morning. Even that simple social behavior needs to be programmed, needs to be actually somehow trained or programmed in a very basic level. And most of you can probably count like dozens and dozens of those little tricks that separates us from software. And so the idea of AI workers is that, why don't we solve that? Why don't we make the AI be as close as possible? Obviously, it will never be as close. I don't want to be pretending that we somehow reach that singularity. But we can get pretty practically close. That again, if you don't squint, you don't really see. You know, I have been basically telling this example that how many of you guys were on a Zoom call today? Probably most of you somehow, probably in the last couple of days. What do you see in a Zoom? You see small pictures of people talking to you. Right now, in a lab, we already have Gaussian, just Google this, Gaussian avatars look identical to humans. Without a forensic search on video, you cannot make a difference between that and a human. It's already there. It requires GPU in the back end, so it doesn't work on the phone yet, the technicality. So in about a year or two from now, you're going to be jumping in a Zoom call. I would challenge you to tell me, without a special badge on the window, who is AI, who is not. It's already here. It's literally in the labs and in the demos. You know, we already have interruption speech from OpenAI, SST, speech-to-text, text-to-speech. All of that is already production level. Just about now, we're missing some of the integration from Zoom or Google Meet plus the Gaussian avatars. So my take on this is that in a couple of years, most of us will be jumping in Zoom calls or something like that. And the only way we can tell that somebody is AI or somebody is individual human being, we're obviously going to have some kind of icon, some badge to that window telling us who is who. Anyways, this is actually an important question. I know it may sound like a platitudes, but I've been pitching this story for the last couple of years, and it is interesting how the sort of a zeitgeist in community is changing. And a couple of years ago, just around the GPT 3.5 came around, we started working this idea, and to my surprise, the response was largely negative. People basically saying, look, this is freaking immoral. Why do you want to build AI to replace people? It's like, this is like inhumane. It's like, we don't want to be part of that. And I was literally taken aback because, very rarely you see that sentiment generally when you work in software, right? You build software, typically it's perceived like some kind of good thing to do. You save time, you're making something more efficient. This was different. When we had the first demo of this, the response was exactly what I described to you. Half the people kind of like it, but another half was like literally actively sort of are against that. So anyways, it's definitely changing. By the way, this sentiment is still here, surprisingly. I mean, I guarantee to you, I can poll this room, about 20% of you probably would tell me that it's kind of icky. People are people, software is software, don't freaking mix it, right? It's like, why do you want to do that? There is a reason why we want to have at least technology. Now, how it's going to evolve and end up, I don't know exactly, because a lot of this depends on regulatory requirements and pressure from a government and whatnot. But think about this. There's about 3.6 billion jobs on this planet. The professional jobs account for about 60% of that. So let's say 2 billion jobs is what the professional jobs are. Basically, those that can be done with a computer, piece of paper, something like this. My biggest contention, and that's probably where my contrarian side kind of comes out, is that I don't believe that we're going to have an AGI in our generation, or maybe our kids' generation. So for the longest time, absolute majority of employees in the companies will be human. And this is, by the way, very different from a lot of my peers in the community, basically. If you listen to, Anthropic folks, OpenAI folks, they will tell you that it's just around the corner and everybody will be replaced. I don't think any of us, can prove anything, but fundamentally, I believe that, the AGI story of this kind of omnipotent replacing everything, we're centuries away from that. We need new physics, we need new energy, all of that takes time, and we can talk about it endlessly. So I do believe that in the 10, 20 years from now, over 90% of the employees will still be people. just like our kids, we are, if we're still here, we're still going to be working in the companies where most employees will be people. However, even if it takes 10% of the employees will be AI-based, that is a massive, massive opportunity. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of jobs. What's also interesting is that if the AI portion is less than half, it follows that fundamentally it's AI's job to adapt how humans work. Think about this. Why would human need to adapt to how 10% operate? 10% is a software. It's better to be actually adjusting how the humans operate in our contemporary world. And that's kind of my biggest contention. There's another interesting point that I strongly believe, and that's back to the question about how does AI, how does company, use agents, right? This question is very fundamental because it's not easy. Just, come back to your own companies, to your own teams, to your own projects, and forget about copilots. Copilots are easy, right? They always have a host application that needs to run it, right? Agents do not heavily host application. They have to somehow run in sort of an ether of something. And think about how would your company would use agent. Now, there's one way, like demonstrated before, like a tooling, but it still requires basically quite a bit of configuration and programming. It's still basically a piece of software that somebody has to acquire, configure, run, or use someone else's API to do it. Wouldn't be a lot easier. And in my contention that the most effective, most efficient way to introduce AI capabilities into a company is to hire AI. Because as a company, you already have all the business processes. And I'll show you in a second, because I know it sounds a little bit too far-fetched. So anyways, these are the two key objections we talked about, right? So having had a privilege to basically pitch this idea, this are the two main objections that I see every time. I talked about the first one, that AI will replace everything and everyone. It basically based on your beliefs. I don't think I have a proof. Nobody has any proof. I believe it's not even the century. Somebody will believe somebody else. But my contention is that, we're nowhere near, because, if you kind of listen to the kind of, sane voices, we need new physics, new energy sources to really go beyond the basics as we have right now. What's also interesting is that, if you look, 2-3 years from now, GPT-5, 6th generation, that's perfectly adequate for many business tasks. We don't need to wait for AGI to get value out of this. You look at our current reasoning models, that's what was been trained in the last year and a half. Multiply it by 3, by 5, you get a very decent reasoning capabilities. We call them reflective, reasoning, but it doesn't matter. Imagine like, 2-3 years, those reasoning capabilities will be way better than today. That's good enough for majority of business tasks. We don't solve, cancer problems in every job every day. Most of our activities during the day are much less complicated, okay? And so it's almost the current zeitgeist that in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever the horizon, the current generation of transformer-based model will be so advanced, they're going to cover 80, maybe 75 to 80% of business tasks as we know them. So that's good enough. Another one, the second one is what basically is almost like a moralistic question. Is it inhumane or immoral to try to replace people at jobs? That's a good question, by the way. I certainly, as any human, can relate to that. I think the moral question aside, we can argue this. Technically, I think, I always keep saying, look at the history. I mean, most of us, as human beings, we tend to think in terms of our lifespan, 60, 70 years, right? Our grandparents, what they were basically going through. But if you ask your grandparents, at least my grandparents, they saw completely different jobs. The typist in the 1950s, 1960s, there was a massive employment for women, as a matter of fact. The horse, carriage drivers. There was a big employment that completely got wiped out in a matter of probably a decade when the Industrial Revolution happened. So these things do happen. And as the jobs disappear and new appear, that's a very natural process. Maybe this one will be bigger. Maybe this one will require a certain regulatory government, or compensation. Most likely will be. I've talked to somebody in Sacramento. It's a big deal because, if you imagine, if you can replace just a 2 or 3% of the jobs in California with AI, it will be literally a civil war. Okay? Forget about 5, 10%. Just a small percentage of job replacement will lead to the massive social upheaval. And so there's a lot of, obviously from a governmental perspective, there's a lot of, thinking about this. What does it even mean? Because obviously the whole problem that most of the AI can do is a lot cheaper than people. AIs don't need social security. The AIs don't need medical. They don't get burned. They don't leave. They're very effective. They don't forget anything. All of a sudden, there is all this, obvious advantages that humans just don't have. And businesses will always look for the sort of a smallest gradient to choose. And that's a very natural thing, right? Why do I have to hire Nikita when I can hire Jacob, who's an AI, who never sleeps and works every time? It's a very basic idea, but fundamentally there's something to it. So anyways, the last slide before I can show you some of the stuff. Why now? Well, I think it's obvious. I mean, most of you guys in the, probably follow in the AI space. I don't want to give you the history lesson, but I think the critical point is obviously introduction of reasoning capabilities. Because again, remember 2 years ago, we just had 3.5 GPT. It can chat, somewhat interestingly, but that has literally very little value. And chain of thought prompting is a very awkward and sort of a kind of slow process. And the reasoning models, even the initial generation of them, right? O1, O3, R7 from DeepSeek, and now the deep research just announced from Grok 3 and the Gemini 2 and all of that, you can see progression. Literally within about 9 months, we progressed from, hey, can you solve that little task from my high school, from middle school, all the way to doing a fairly deep research and deep end research, like Gemini can show and OpenAI can show. So the introduction of reasoning models is definitely a linchpin for both agents and AI workers, because all of a sudden we can now do a little bit something just slightly more interesting than just a code generation of something. And I think that's why now. Obviously, it's not a point in time. It's more of a continuum. We're going to be talking here 2 years from now. We're probably going to be having the same presentation, same conversation, but slightly better results. But, we're there in terms of kind of, we're over the Rubicon. Now we're in a sort of a adoption expansion plateau. So let me actually show what Humatron is working on. Again, this is, it's a sort of a very early stage. It's a team is basically working on it every day. It's a work in progress. But fundamentally, this is an idea that you basically, I'm actually maximize this so we can see it probably better. Yeah. So essentially, have a website. We can basically you have all kinds of workers. Right now, obviously, those workers are just a demo proxies against all the different models. But the idea is that you treat the workers pretty much like you treat a people. They have resume. You can interview them. They have skill sets. You can find them. You can look for them. So if I just log in here, just give me a sec. So you can basically end up in a different place, and you can search for all these different resumes any way you like it by skills and whatnot. Let's say we're looking for like GPT Mini, and I think it's this one. And not only can see in this tab what's available, like a training, whether it's a free trial, some language support, some channel support. I'll talk about this in a second. Some skill set. You can click out and see kind of very traditional sort of resume style, right? There's a profile, just like humans. What can we do? What can we not do? Some basic core skills, some technical training, some languages I know, some countries that can be placed on. We'll talk about this in a second, why it's even matter here. Some of the onboarding steps, some of the communication channels I can talk to, right? Like a human being, I can do emails, I can do phone, SMS, I can do Slack, I can do all kinds of different things. These guys can do too, by the way, so pretty cool. The coolest thing is that I don't really buy anything. I'm hiring, and it's exactly the same. I can hire monthly, I can hire hourly, and I can choose that. So we can interview, by the way. So we can go here and start an interview process, just like we do with the actual human being. And, well, what is it you can do for me? And Obviously, as you can imagine, that's pretty simple. It basically looks at, its own description. It knows it's a self-aware entity. It lives, it knows that it's been interviewed. It knows by whom. It knows who he is or she is. And it basically can answer. And it can basically ask not only this, but can basically say, what it will cost me to hire you for, 6 months. And it obviously is going to calculate that and answer. So it's a self-aware system that basically tells you all those interview questions. So you can ask about anything you like. Yeah?
Can it use Jira?
If you have a tool for that, yes. Yeah. It can actually do everything the tools can do. So anyways, if you like the interview, you can talk about this. And you can ask, for example, can you answer that in Italian? And obviously, it knows Italian, so it should be able to do that. I guess anybody speaks Italian, so I hope it is. Anyways, if you like the interview, right, what do you do after you interview individuals, right, human beings? Well, you go ahead and hire them. Just go ahead and do it. Let's click hire. So this is actually very similar how you would actually find a normal hiring application for human beings. Pretty long. It's pretty cool, by the way. I'll explain to you what's one of the things. So first of all, you have a first name and last name. A lot of these, I kind of, when I describe these things like a gender and an age group, people kind of freak out a little bit. So why do you need these things for AI, right? Well, I can explain most of them, right? So obviously, you need a name. You can use technical name. You can use pretty much human names. Doesn't really matter. Gender age group fields mostly for a kind of a model context and the grammar and a pronoun. So at least if if it's a gender, we know how to use pronouns. I'm not going to go in details about this whole political issue, but fundamentally have genders that you have to know about, right? You can pick, avatars if you like it, right? Obviously, we have a bunch of, built ones, so let's pick anyone and move forward. You have to give a title. I mean, when you hire somebody, there's a job title. You have to give a title. You have to give a job description, assigned to a certain team. I don't know, let's call it a coding assistant, as usual. And this is interesting. Country, city, time zone, and primary language. So you can place your AI worker in a certain location virtually, in a certain time zone. City is kind of superficial. It's mostly for just the fun. But what's interesting, think about this. When you're hiring people, they don't work 24 hours. When you hire an engineer, let's say you're the manager, you hire an engineer. You don't want this engineer bugging in the middle of the night with the code updates. How do you model this? You gotta basically place this engineer close to your engineering team in the same time zone, same city, for example, so that anybody asks you, hey, Johnny, where are you located? He will tell you basically, I'm located in Palo Alto. I'm in Pacific time zone. And you can actually, down here, you can basically specify, is it working 24/7 or 9 to 5? And 24/7 is basically just like software, right? It works all the day, all the time. But you can click here, and it will be very smart to know that if something urgent, he will actually bug you at any time. But most of the work-related communication will be delayed in the 9 to 5 time frame of where it's placed. It's very similar how humans operate. Think about this. When you hire somebody, you don't expect them to be 24/7. You expect them to be like working normal business hours in a certain time zone, whatever this person is. And you can do that. And then you have a bunch of communication style things. You can have very informal sort of a style. Most of us probably work in startups, so it can be like very informal communication. If you work for a law firm, you want to be very, very formal with your communication style. You can do that. You can actually work in creativity, which is fundamentally temperature of a model. And again, most of it can be adaptive. You can work in brevity in the language mode, very plain language. For example, if your audience is kids or teenagers, you want to explain a lot of terminology in that use abbreviations. Vice versa, if your audience is very technical, use a lot of abbreviations, so kind of shorten that. So you can configure all the social communication preferences. This is pretty cool, workspace persona. This actually has an impact on the long-running tasks. You can, for example, configure your worker to be more of a builder, right? And he will, I'm saying he or she, it will try to essentially prioritize completing tasks in building things versus exploring the, a solution field, space. and vice versa. You can click on visionary. It's all going to basically going out and trying to explore everything, trying to come up with different things, and probably prioritize less of completing something on the deadlines and stuff like this. You can specify who is a hiring manager, who is a contact person, pick a start date, and pick how you want to pay for it. Simple as this. Hourly, monthly, doesn't, agree terms, and literally hire. What's going to happen now is that his name Kai. Kai is basically hired. And we can go right away, start working with Kai. We can find Kai on our team. I have a bunch of hires already here. Here is the Kai right there. And we obviously have, like everybody else, we have a built-in chat, but that's not the only way to do it. I'm sure that I already got an email from Kai. And this is let's see if I got an email from Kai, and this is Kai. And this is how basically it looks like a similar. So Kai has been hired, and he immediately sent me an email from his private email. And he's basically telling me, hey, Nikita, nice to meet you, nice to join you. Here's what you can do. You can configure a Slack, you can configure SMS. You can send me an email to this. It's basically a very natural way of doing this. So we go back to Kai. And by the way, we can just chat to Kai. No, it's like we're... So this is, let me see if I can open chat. Yep, sorry. So this was a little smaller window, sorry for that. But fundamentally, you have Kai here with all the stats. You can manage him, you can terminate, you can pause him, whatever you like a human beings. You have other hires in the team. Those are all AI hires. This is communication channels that Kai has. We can configure a Slack for him if we need to. Basically, he will appear on our Slack in the company. We can configure SMS. We'll assign a phone number to him so you can basically text him whatever you want to text him, and he will text you back whatever he decides to. And yeah, you have basically a chat application here. You can start now talking. It's basically, welcome aboard. And his life. He can basically, this is the kind of, a backup chat system that we have in his life. And thank you immensely. And we can send him back email. So we don't have to chat just to buy this. We can basically, hey, we can just say something. Yeah, we'll fire him in the end, as you guys like it. Can you send me, Scala 3 code for a bubble sort, right? Something that everybody does. And firing perfectly fine. You go to manage right here, and you have all kinds of things. You can basically pause him. It's a software, so you can very convenient. You can pause him, unpause him if you like, and obviously you can terminate him. And since he's got no feelings, we can terminate him as well as you might like. Yeah.
In a pod in ChatGPT, I can ask it to do something, and it does it pretty quickly. How do I keep this bot busy?
How do you keep busy anybody? Just give him a task, ask him. Yeah, it's basically, again, the concept here is that you don't really have to do anything special. I want you to essentially, after you hire somebody, by the way, see, most of you are going to be working with Slack and emails and Teams and whatever. You forget about Humatron. You just hired an entity. It has a name and face. And all of a sudden, day and 2, 3 down the road, you kind of forget it's a AI. It's just there. It communicates with you. It does the work for you, whatever you ask him to do. And over time, you just don't even think about it. It's there. It just basically never gets sick, never gets late, does something pretty nicely, remembers terabytes of information, and kind of a nice guy to have around, or a gal.
You want those questions? I'll bring my to you. Nikita, you want to answer questions now?
True.
Thank you. Very interesting. So what I'm wondering, if such a hired bot, basically, doing a trouble, doing a mistake, who is eventually responsible for that?
So what's the what happens with humans?
Humans are legal entities. You can Yes. Then other.
Yeah, we're not going to go that route, and I'm saying I don't think it's going to happen, but fundamentally, the most interactions will be very similar. You're obviously not going to sue AI because there's always an explanation that AI can make a mistake and whatnot. And vice versa, by the way. Your AIs will not sue you for whatever it may happen. So it goes both ways. But AIs will definitely make mistakes. And for many, many, many years to come, you have to remember that if there's something tangible, you better double check. That's just very simple.
Hi. So usually when you onboard somebody, especially in an engineering team, you might have like a group chat and you guys are in a channel and you have a conversation. So if, let's say, there's a team of 5 people, one of them is an AI, is he or she gonna contribute to the conversation, or is it gonna be like, hey, AI, say something, give your opinion?
Yeah. So what I'm not showing you is the whole other side. How do you build those workers? And that's going to be something that the team is working on. But fundamentally, it depends a lot on implementation of that worker. And it's going to be a kind of no-code implementation, so you're not going to be writing a lot of code for it or at all. I tend to think that for a long time, it's going to be mostly reactive. But even right now, we're going to supply all the Slack communications back to that entity, and it can decide. Huh?
They're not going to be in meetings.
You can invite them.
But they're not going to say anything until you ask them.
No, it's entirely up to it. It will have all the stream of conversation that happens on this meeting. And if the model decides that it needs to interject with something, for example, somebody mentions its name and says, I asked Johnny to fix something. Johnny can actually say, no, I didn't. I don't have any record of that. You didn't ask me. So again, this technicality, I know it sounds a little bit far-fetched, and not everything is implemented yet by us or by underlying systems. But this is something that is, literally, we're talking about quarters, not years. Some of this will be more complex, by the way. Like I always keep saying that the video meetings are probably a couple of years away, just fundamentally because, at least for now, GAS and avatars require complex GPUs to run it. They run on a game engine, like like Unity or something. So it's not feasible on the phones yet. It's already feasible on the desktop, but not on the phones. Most of us talk on the phones and whatever. So that's kind of the delaying part of that.
One more question on the back.
When they hire somebody, you usually have to give them credentials. You have to teach them your business processes. We do story points. We don't do story points. How do you estimate, the tasks and stuff like that? How do you train this AI and keep the state?
That's actually that's a simpler problem. When it appears in the Slack, 5 minutes later after you onboard Slack, just dump a bunch of PDF to him and say, look, read this all through. This is how we do business here. And believe me, it's going to be better than anybody human you ever hired, because he will actually parse that PDF technically and remember every goddamn point in that PDF. So that's an easy one. All of them have memory, obviously, so from implementation standpoint, so they don't keep a longer context. Most models, by the way, this is where we rely on the models. Most models will have, I forget about the term, but essentially sort of a elaborative context. They're going to summarize their own context, their own memory, so they're going to keep more and more in memory over a long time. So the good news, we don't have to do it. Most of the foundation models move in this direction. Again, remember this example. 6 months ago, it's almost impossible to do background tasks in LLM. You really have to twist yourself on the pretzel to implement this. Today, it's a one simple call in OpenAI. And OpenAI does as a clock. 6 months later, Mistral, DeepSeek, and every goddamn will implement exactly the same functionality like everybody else. So in a year from now, the background task, which is very critical for autonomous behavior, background tasks will become a standard in LLMs. And so on, and so on, and so on. So all of a sudden, I've been in the database business for 20 years, and I truly believe the database business is coming to an end. Because guess what's going to happen? LLMs will provide a long-term storage. OpenAI just bought the company 6 months ago in database business. What do you think? Why? because everybody needs this functionality. I want to store a couple of terabytes of data in the LLM in my context, not somewhere database like an Amazon. In context of my LLM, because it needs this. Right now, it's not possible. Given about 9 months to a year, all of a sudden, OpenAI will come up with a database API, and everybody will jump around and do the same thing. And all of a sudden, in 2 years, we're all storing data in LLM, not in databases, because LLM needs this data most of the time. So this is going to be happening, and that's going to be all benefiting systems like this, because for companies like Humatron or anybody else in the same space, we don't have to do all of this. We just need to provide all this social, organizational integration and all of that additional add-on value. But fundamentals for these agents and AI workers by extension will be by the foundational models.
Last question here.
I have one. So what if they unionize if I hire like a 5, you know? No, it's just a joke. So I was curious kind of about this problem of, let's say, loading the database into the AI model. I came with a memory question just before, but you kind of continued by yourself. So let's say I have, a typical company with like 250 terabytes of data, and I need to load something, and that needs to end up in the LLM. How do I choose? How do I load? What's your guys' experience in terms of like what data you provide to your agents?
I don't have that experience. I don't think anybody loads that data in because
I don't think now, but let's say in the future. But now, how are you actually managing the context management, and what do you think is going to happen in the future?
we absolutely reliant on LLM here. We don't really do anything special. Anybody using LangChain, you set up the memory in LangChain, you're basically done. Now, right now, there is a technical limitation. Most of the contexts are pretty reasonable. So what are we talking about right now? What's the largest context? Anybody knows? Like Gemini 2? Yeah, something like this, yeah. So it's still, by database measure, it's basically nothing. So I don't believe the context actually will grow because there is a typical, lost in the middle problem with large context, and you don't want to grow them in terabytes. Just, we don't have models for this yet. But I think, again, my strong expectation based on some of the internal knowledge, the most of that foundational model providers will provide their own a long-term persistent storage. It's just a very natural idea. So instead of constantly cramming everything in a context, summarizing, doing some kind of quantization, reduction, whatever else, just give me all the data, we'll store it, and we'll manage ourselves. How do we get access to it? How do we do RAGing inside of it? So none of you, by the way, another interesting problem. Most likely the RAGing is going to basically subside in usage because it's a temporary solution. Models don't have persistent storage, therefore we have to constantly, find the, pieces of context now on the outside. Remember what happened to chain of thought? 2 years ago was a, peak of science, right? Today it's basically disappearing because now all that is happening within the model itself. In a different way, but semantically, it's the same idea. The same story will be happening with RAG and persistent storage. It's a temporary solution as we have right now. It's still going to exist because obviously not everything will be in the model, and there's going to be some, normal use cases where you need to have data outside of the model. But right now, RAG is the only way to do right now. That's definitely changing. So 2 years from now, RAG will be a very unique use case when you keep your data outside of the model for some reason. Then yes, you have to do that. Most of the time, you don't have to fiddle around with vector databases, none of this crap. You basically just, hey, here's a bunch of data for me to you model, and here's my questions coming in. Do whatever needs to be done.
All right, so we don't have time for more questions. We need to get to the next talk, so let's thank Nikita and hope he will be around.